So this is a question I get all the time. I want to be an architect, but I'm not good at math. Can I still be an architect? The answer is not as easy as you'd hope. So I'm going to explain 3 types of math that we use on a daily basis so you can help decide if architecture is the right move for you. Let's get started. Let's talk about the first type of math we do on a daily basis. And this is probably the most important one, and it's also kind of simple. So again, if you're like super nervous about not being great at math, this is why I wouldn't worry too much about it. But there are some caveats to this. So check this out. So this is a pool house. It's a brand new pool house. We can see some dimensions that it's 22 feet by 6 inches and then 15 foot 6. The reason I'm pointing this out is if you're designing something new, there's usually some sort of zoning code that's saying, hey, you can only have it be this many square feet. Typically, they might go by the interior dimension. So let's do some math here. So the reason we're looking at the dimensions is every single municipality has got some sort of zoning code, and this is what's going to dictate how large a structure can be. So when it comes to pool houses or sheds, this is, kind of sensitive territory, and there's often limitations as to how large a structure can be. So this is why being able to do a square footage calc is very important. If you get this wrong, you're going to get rejected. Your client's going to think you're dumb, and it's not a great look for anyone. Let's say in this zone, we're not allowed a pool house of over 350 square feet. Okay. So if we were to do some math here, 22.5 by 15.5, and just plug it into the calculator, because as an architect, your calculator doesn't go away, right? You still have access to this. And you even have tools built into AutoCAD and Revit that will actually do these square footage calcs for you. But I'm showing you what's required, right? So here we're at 349. So here we're safe, and that's a big part of it. It's just like making sure you're under the zoning code. But then there's also the situation of, let's say a client's like, hey, I've got a bedroom. I need it to be 400 square feet. It's your job to then do the math to figure out, okay, how are we going to get 400 square feet? Is it 20 by 20? Is it 25 by 15? That's the type of math we're doing. We're not doing like really complicated math. We're making sure we're meeting compliance, whether that's the zoning code or that's with a client. I don't want you to stress too much about that. But the other side of square footage calc is how much does it cost? Contractors will often say, maybe it's $200 a square foot to build. So now to do a general estimate, let's do 350 times 200. I now have an estimate for this pool house. Maybe it'll cost $70,000. And that number, that multiplier is going to, vary depending on availability of materials, where you're located and everything. So that's why this part is super important, because if we get this wrong, all of our numbers are going to be wrong. Especially in the world of real estate where every single square foot matters because they want to know how much they can sell a unit for. You might have a client that says, oh, I need one bedroom to be 200 square feet and I need a certain room to be 400 square feet. That's why this is important, and making sure you're working within the parameters to meet their needs. Okay, this happens with every single architectural project. So that's why square footage is so important. You can't get that part wrong. The other side of it is the square footage actually dictates how many people can live in there or be in there. And that's considered the occupant load. Basically in the building code, if you're using it for this type of space, divide it by this number, and that's how many people can fit. If you ever go to a gymnasium and you see those signs, or even a restaurant, it's like maximum occupancy. That's what I'm talking about. That's where that's coming from. The other thing is when it comes to light and vent, how much light is in the room, that's coming from windows, and ventilation, like fresh air. And that's always a percentage based on the square footage. The second thing I want to point out when it comes to math in architecture, I'm going to call this logic-based thinking. What I want to point out here is often when we're dealing with our architectural projects, we're probably sourcing some scope out to a structural engineer or an MEP engineer. And what those guys are going to do is either size columns, beams, or ducts, like ventilation elements, right? So what happens is sometimes those elements need to fit in either our floor or our walls. So let's say I've been drawing a default wall at about 3.5 inches. There might be an area where the structural engineer or even the MEP engineer is like, hey, I need like an 8-inch by 1 foot space. That way I can fit my pipes and my structure, right? And that's what these spaces are. These are called plenums. It's important for you to understand, okay, well, if we're talking about a 1 foot by 8-inch space, let me drag that out. This shape, this form needs to fit. So obviously this isn't going to fit here. So that's why we have these plenums. That way we can fit all of our structure and our pipes in the wall. See that? So that's going to fit perfectly. So that gives them the clearance. You'll often hear that architects or even vice versa complain that the structural engineer is like putting too much stuff in the walls or the architect isn't providing enough space for them. That's what this conversation is coming from. So that's why it's important when you're designing early on that you actually understand what needs to go in the walls, so you're designing something that can actually fit. So I can then place this piece here, and that's totally fine. But the other part of this is the assembly part of things. And this is simple math. So let's say we've got a wall, a typical interior construction wall. We're gonna have a 1/2 inch for sheetrock or drywall, right? So let's say I'm going out here. So let's say 1/2 inch, right? So that's this, that's 1/2 inch. Then I need 3.5 inches just for structure. That's this, right? So this is structure, this is drywall, and then I need another 1/2 inch. And that is just a simple wall. So if I'm drawing everything at, let's say 4 inches, I'm not gonna be able to make it fit, right? Because 1/2 inch, then 3.5, and then another 1/2 inch isn't gonna fit in 4 inches. So that's another side of math, actually just doing the logic. Can I fit all this in a specific area? So that's the second one. And the last type of math we do actually comes down to zoning, just pure zoning. Whenever you have a plot of land and you want to build something, there's certain codes that say how far you have to be off of the property line. So there's things called like a front yard setback, side yard setback, rear yard setback. That's why you can't have like a gazillion houses on like one small lot. Zoning code is saying you can only have one structure and it has to be, let's say 20 feet off the road. So let's say this is my property line, right? So this green outline is my property line. And zoning code is saying I have to be 20 feet off the front yard setback. So watch this. So I have my front yard setback. I'm going to move this back 20 feet. There we go. I can now put the front of the house up to this line. So if I were to just grab this real dirty and put it here, it could be here, right? There are definitely benefits to having offset, of course, but that's the minimum. Then with the side yard setback, they might not say like one side has to be 5 feet or it has to be a combination of 20 feet in total. So that's where some simple math is coming in. So let's say it's 20 feet in total, but it's a minimum of 5 feet. So this is where the simple math is coming in. So if I'm saying I want the right side to be 5 feet for some reason, that's 5 feet. What does the other side have to be? This is simple math, right? 15 feet, okay? Because we need to hit that 20 dimension. And there you go. So now let's pretend like this goes all the way out, as it does. Our house needs to fit within this zone. And then of course there's the rear yard setback, okay? But that's my point. The math is not that complicated. I feel like people think architects are doing structure all the time and like we're doing load calculations and everything, like beam load calculation. That's not really the case. Yes, that can happen, but we have spreadsheets, we have tools to make sure like we're not messing up. I think it's kind of a myth at this point. The math I showed you here, this is 90% of like what you'll be doing. And again, that's square footage. That's the logic of packing things in a wall or in a plenum. Lastly is zoning. And there's a lot of overlap between them. You know, there's things called lot coverage for zoning. And that's basically like, what is the percent of your house on the lot? Let's say it can only be 10%, right? So that's the other part of it. They kind of all go hand in hand. So that is really the extent of it. If you can handle this, which most can, right? Because computers do most of it, and we do have calculators. It's not like you lose the calculator. You can definitely be an architect. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. If you have any ideas for future content, please let me know in the comments. See you next time.